Okay, we're back. I guess we last met like a week ago, 6 days ago.
6 days ago. Should we continue the conversation where we
We can
left off?
continue the conversation. Before we begin, let's tell them real quick that we might have a third guest coming in at some time. He is a bit late, but he is a student like us, and he brings a lot to the discussion, so we're looking
Yeah.
forward to having him.
Hopefully it's gonna work out. It's been great, the two of us the past few times, and we're looking forward to see how it works out with a third person.
We were kind of talking about how the dynamics might change with a third person. And yeah, we think there's pros and cons to it, so we're going to test it out this time, see if we like it. If we do, we might do it again. If we don't, then I guess no need. But
Yeah.
we're flexible.
Yep. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, exactly. You were saying about last time.
Yeah, so if I remember correctly, we left off talking about pretty much the concept of the soul and whether there is anything more than just material to what makes up a human person. And so I told you before we started, there was this great thought experiment that I encountered. And it's called Mary's Room.
Okay.
Have you heard of it?
I haven't, no.
So the premise is that Mary is a neuroscientist, and she studied everything there is to know about color vision.
Okay.
She knows like all the physics that are behind it, all the synapses that get activated, all the changes that occur on the synaptic level, all the neuron firing that occurs when someone sees the color red.
Yep.
Every single thing there is to know.
You're going to say,
Yeah.
You're going to say she doesn't know if your red is the same as my red.
Something similar.
Okay. Sorry.
So the caveat is that she lives in a black and white world.
Okay.
Everything she sees is black and white. She's never actually seen color, but she knows everything there is to know about it, just cognitively.
Right.
The question is, if one day she sees an actual apple in her office,
Can she recognize it as
that's
red?
red color. She recognizes it because she knows like how it's supposed to feel like, or not. Like she knows what the color is.
Okay.
But the question is if she's never seen it before, but she knows everything about it, does the act of seeing this red apple for the first time ever add anything to her knowledge of redness? Or does it not?
I think it definitely adds something. I think the experience of doing something adds to it. I think I've heard a similar thought experiment for pain. You could describe being in pain, but imagine somebody who's never been in pain. They don't know what pain is until they feel it. I think experiencing a color, experiencing a sound, experiencing an emotion is something you can't learn from a book, right? Just like skydiving is an experience you can't have in the library.
Yeah, and so the thought experiment kind of wants us to say that because there is something that is being added by this experience, there has to be something beyond materialistic that adds some sort of sentimental value to the experience. There has to be an experiencer that transcends this materialistic world.
Why does it have to transcend the materialistic world?
Well, because if you're saying, well, this cone in her retina is being activated,
Right.
She already knows all of that. She knows that this cone is going to be activated. And so what's the difference between knowing that something is going to happen and between it actually happening and her feeling it?
Because her cone has never been activated. There's a unique pathway in the brain when you see the color red compared to when you study about the color red. You know? Like, the adrenaline rush I get from skydiving is very different from me reading about skydiving. So skydiving's like maybe I'm extrapolating into that example, but there's the sight, there's the sound, there's the feel, there's the acceleration, there's the gravity.
It's the exact same situation.
But that...
Yeah, there's the adrenaline...
Those are other inputs. Just like the cone going into her brain is a unique input from her eyes reading a black and white page that says, this is the wavelength for the color red. So I see the thought experiment as more going for like experienced versus inexperienced rather than material brain versus supernatural other, like I feel like there are actual other physical inputs that the lady in the room in black and white isn't experiencing, or the person who's never been skydiving is experiencing.
Oh, okay. So you think like just knowing everything there is to know about adrenaline?
It doesn't change what adrenaline actually does to your state.
Yeah.
Just like knowing everything there is to know about pain. Like, we can study all the effects of heroin withdrawal. We don't know what it's like to withdraw from heroin. Some people describe it as heartbreak. But even I didn't know what heartbreak felt like until I had a girlfriend and we broke up and we had heartbreak. You know, these are like experiences that you can read about, but you can't. I think this is why, like we were saying in a previous episode, in the West they revere the old because they're wise and they're the sages of society, because they have all these experiences, because there's things that you can read about, but reading about it doesn't compare to actually experiencing it.
Yeah, I agree about that. And I see your point about there being a new pathway that's being activated. So yeah, I guess the counter argument would be that I know what this activation of this pathway entails.
Okay.
Like, I know this neuron in my brain is going to fire. It's never fired before, but I know that it's going to fire, and I know it's going to. And so if I can see all of that in my head, like everything that's going on in my brain, were I to see the color red,
Right.
then to me at least it seems like when it actually happens to me, there has to be some different part that's that is the experiencer. Like, I know what's going on in the brain, so the brain is the thing that is experiencing, but it seems like there is also an experiencer. I don't know if that.
Yeah. No, it does make
That
sense.
probably doesn't sound right. But.
No, I know what you're saying. I think they could be one and the same. Okay, we have our guest.
Hi.
How's it going, dude?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Good. That's for
Where did
you.
you guys get this mic?
It's from upstairs.
Amazing.
Good
No
to see
idea.
you.
It's like
Altapala.
that's for you.
Ah,
Thanks for
thanks,
bringing
guys.
these, bro.
Yeah. How does it taste?
Amazing. It's not super sugary. I like it.
Kind of
It complements protein well.
Yeah. So
That's really nice for not that many sugars, I guess.
it is. Yeah, it's less than Coca-Cola, but
More than water.
More than water.
I don't think that's that hard. How are you guys doing?
Good.
What topic did I walk into?
Whether there exists an immaterial soul, pretty much.
Ah,
Whether like the person is more than the sum of his parts.
okay. All right. Let's. Cool.
Right before you came, we were discussing the thought experiment of Mary's room,
Okay.
and that entity is the soul. And so
I think we never paused, so I think we're good.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
still recording.
yeah.
I don't think it needs to be an outside entity. I think it can be the same one. Because you're saying that because there's a separate pathway that hasn't been activated, it needs to what? How does that tie into a super? How does that tie into another entity?
Because your entity already knows everything that is supposed to happen in that pathway.
But knowing about something is very different from actually having it go through that pathway in your brain. We can read about childbirth. We can learn about all the endorphin release and all the oxytocin release that goes on when you breastfeed a child and have a baby and do skin to skin and all that, but we'll never experience it. Because we'll never have like the pain trigger, the actual baby being birthed, the release, the Valsalva maneuvers, the pushing, we'll never actually do that. And all of that combined over the time scale of birth, like the 10 hours that it requires to have birth or whatever, creates that experience, creates those circuits in your brain. You know what I mean? It doesn't seem like you need another entity to explain it, is what I was thinking.
Yeah. It might be not the greatest analogy, but I still. It's like, can the brain experience itself? Like, when that pathway is being activated, it's the. I don't know what I'm trying to say here.
I think I agree with Alex on this one, that it doesn't require, the experience changes, the theory of it. And I think that follows with pretty much anything that you do for the first time. You might understand perfectly the theory of any task that you set yourself to, but the reality of pulling it off, or how it interacts with all of the other circuitry in your brain that you might not even have considered, despite the fact that even if you had known it, you could not predict exactly how it would make you feel, makes it different and unique.
That's another point. Like, so earlier I mentioned that reading about skydiving and going skydiving is very different because you have all these other inputs, all these other stimuli, the audio, the visuals, the rush, the acceleration, the endorphins, the whatever, adrenaline, that all comes from actually going skydiving. So those are additional inputs, but there are also, like he said, additional outputs. How does it make you feel? And those outputs, those feelings of seeing the color red or of going skydiving or of having a baby, all feed back into your memory and consciousness and experience. You know, it's like when you do something that you think you're initially going to hate, and you hate it when you do it, but then you walk away being happy that you've done it, right? Just like grad school.
Yeah.
We don't hate ourselves now, but
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of feedback that goes on in the brain that we don't think about because it just happens naturally. But I'm wondering where this other consciousness comes in.
Yeah, I don't think any of that ties into there being necessarily a second consciousness. So if the question is to address whether or not there is like a soul or a spirit, a consciousness beyond what's material, I suspect that's the wrong analogy or metaphor to use to think about that question.
Do you remember anything else?
About
The metaphor?
no,
Or the-
yeah, it was pretty much that. But I think it was more going at the pathway is there. It can either be activated or not activated. And it was just going at what's the difference between just knowing everything there is to know about the pathway versus it actually being activated. And if it does actually get activated, then
Well, that's
yeah, you're saying there are other parts of the brain that
it doesn't happen in isolation, that the
Yeah.
experience itself changes the way that pathway works. It's like, I mean, I think, and this might be completely off topic, but it's a little bit like the dual slit experiment when you're trying to look at a photon. And if you try to look at it in a certain way, it looks like a wave. And then if you try to look at it a different way, it looks like an individual particle. And the nature of observing changes the way that it is perceived.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's like the feedback on the experience.
Right. So it's like the actual doing of it changes the way that it operates. But that doesn't, none of this implies that there's any kind of separate consciousness on your part that's changing that experience.
yeah, I mean, and if the point is that there are other areas of the brain that could be doing this processing that aren't accounted for by the pathway, the thought experiment could say that, Mary knows everything to know about, like, every subsequent.
Yeah. Okay,
Think
so
that would-
assume that Mary knows all the emotional consequences of seeing the color red and everything else about it. Assume that she knows everything that we're talking about
Yeah,
this
like-
experience of seeing red.
Like the from the photon entering and activating a certain cone in the retina to going through the thalamus to the visual cortex to like wherever limbic system it goes after that.
Yeah, and the emotions it elicits and the actions it elicits and the...
yeah. If she knows all of,
She knows it as if she's experienced it before, but she just hasn't.
But what's the difference then?
I don't think. I wouldn't put it that way because if she knows it just as if she has experienced it, I think it's the active experience itself that this like idea was going at, that the active experience. I think like this whole thought experiment is just another way of saying we exist and we perceive things, whereas the chair doesn't perceive anything.
But a mouse sees things and experiences things. So does a mouse have a soul or a spirit, and should we be more conscientious about the way in which we treat these animals based on that assumption or knowledge, right?
Do we know that a mouse? Yeah, it does. It does see things and interact with things, but the question is, does the mouse have consciousness?
Well, that's a different question. I
It
can
is,
experience
yeah.
red without consciousness.
Yeah.
So can Mary. I hope. I guess there's three things going on here. One is the experiential world. One is your consciousness, which we all agree exists. We are all conscious beings. And the third part would be, is that consciousness tied to an ethereal part that we are unable to measure or detect by any means that we currently have at our disposal?
Mm.
And I don't know that we're doing anything other than flicking between the experience and trying to determine whether or not consciousness is required for experience or not. But that doesn't really have any bearing on whether or not the spirit or soul exists.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. All right. I will concede to you guys that this thought experiment isn't as good as I thought it would be.
No,
but I think it's pretty interesting.
No,
though.
it is interesting, and I wonder if there's more to it that we missed because I bet we haven't. I mean, we haven't read it, so I wonder.
I watched like a 3-minute TED talk on it.
Oh,
And this was like
They made
included.
TED Talks that are 3
oh,
minutes.
that's all there is to it.
It's
There's
like a
nothing else.
TED 3-minute video. Yeah.
This clip's going to be longer than that.
But it was apparently part of some French philosopher's dissertation.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure like he would have elaborated much more on it.
What other evidence is there for a soul?
So for me, when someone asks that question, I find it easiest to just go on the assumption that there isn't a soul, and we see where that leads us to.
Okay, where does that lead us? Let's do that.
If there is no soul, do you think soul is tied to free will?
First, what is a soul? Because my understanding of a soul is like a supernatural component to your existence and your consciousness. Right, something that isn't made of material, isn't made of atoms, isn't made of cells, isn't made of anything in the physical world. Protons,
Yeah,
neutrons,
that is the ultimate decision maker.
Why is that a decision maker? So that's part of the definition, is what you're saying? The soul is the ultimate decision maker?
I would think so. Yeah, that you have, or maybe the primary decision maker is the soul, and then the decision process goes through the brain, and then it goes through the body. Like, if I wanted to move my arm, my soul would say move to the left, move to the left, and then that command would go through the brain, through like the motor cortex, and then it would go to the muscle, and if the muscle works, it goes to the left, and if not,
So where does the command originate?
from the soul.
Where's the soul?
Physically,
Yeah, or anything.
I think the idea is that it is not. It is beyond like the world that we live in. It interacts with like our bodies. It interacts with the world through the body. So like the soul, senses what's going on because the body senses it, and it interacts with the world by commanding the body to do things. But
So it's in your brain somewhere. You're kind of describing input and output of the body, and the soul is at the center of that.
I don't know if I would say in the brain, but
Okay. It at least interacts.
it interacts, I think, most directly with the brain.
Okay. I've read a lot of arguments that say that we don't have free will and that everything is deterministic and everything is a product of our upbringing and our environment and our surroundings.
What do you think about that?
They don't sit very well with me, but I think those are more convincing than us having a soul that controls things. Because we don't have a model or any kind of evidence for the origination of decisions in the brain. And I get the decisions have to start from somewhere, right? If I choose to move my arm, that decision to move my arm needs to come from somewhere, and you're saying it comes from a soul.
Yeah.
I think it's more likely that the entire universe is deterministic and it has already been decided that I'm going to move my arm and that it's been decided that I'm going to think about moving my arm, right?
I can see that point. What do you think, Brian, about that?
I'm catching up with my thoughts and the
Yeah.
conversation currently. I
Yeah.
think you're right that it's, given the instruments we have, it is more likely and easier to understand a world in which everything is predetermined. Therefore, from the conception of the Big Bang, everything was set into motion and things are playing out exactly as they were supposed to be played out. has a number of ramifications for free will, obviously, and for, I suppose, whether or not you're responsible for your actions, or anything similar to that. That being said, we're at that bridge again, I think, where we're splitting between two different ideas. Forget the soul for right now. Again, we agreed earlier that we have a consciousness, and we also, and the deterministic model would say that it doesn't matter if you're conscious, you had no control over what you were going to do, you were always going to do whatever it is you did.
Right.
So you can either have like a cause-effect based view of the world where everything happens because it was predetermined to be so, or we could say most of the physical world operates on the cause and effect basis, but for some reason, living organisms have something resembling consciousness and can make decisions to interact with this cause and effect based physical space.
So you're just merging the two ideas and saying that everything is deterministic except for in our heads.
Well, I'm only saying that because I don't know if what's in our heads is deterministic or not. But I'm saying the possibility exists because of my lack of understanding that a consciousness exists. But I'm not extending that to a soul at this point. I'm just saying that there is something we can register with ourselves having the thought to, for example, move our arm, or the urge to go for a run or have a drink. But the decision to do it, we recognize that as something that we decided to do.
How do you know?
Well, that's what I'm saying. We don't really know.
Okay.
But we think
we do.
That's what we think.
Yeah.
So either that's true, and so there's an element of consciousness in the human or in animals where they can say, I've seen how cause and effect is, and this is what I'm going to do because this is the world and the physical constraints I live in. Which is different to just saying, oh, I did it because that's what I was always going to do.
I don't think there's any way to differentiate between those two.
I agree. I don't think right now we have any way of differentiating between the two.
And I don't think there's any evidence for the first one that you said. I don't think there's any evidence for it not being deterministic.
I didn't say there was evidence that it's not deterministic. I'm just giving you two options, and I'm not saying which one is more likely than the other. I'm just saying they both exist. And the only reason is the thought test that if I think I'm going to go for a run this evening, then I'm going to choose to believe, or maybe I just plain de facto believe that it's because I've decided to go for a run.
But that's also consistent with the deterministic universe. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. If I choose to believe it because the universe decided, I would always choose to believe it. Yes. There's nothing inconsistent there. But I can't tell you how to differentiate between the two.
I think
so. Go ahead.
Brian, you brought up a really interesting point earlier about how we agreed there is consciousness, and that if we also say that everything is predetermined, and that we have consciousness that experiences things and makes us feel them, then the implication is that this consciousness is forever imprisoned, right? By the decisions that have already been made.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
Well, there were no decisions. It doesn't make sense to talk about decisions.
It is imprisoned by what has been set in motion.
Yeah.
For that consciousness to exist. Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
That's probably
based
true. Based on the theory of no free will, that would be the answer. Yeah. And I think that's because it seems like what you were saying, these two scenarios, it seems like both scenarios can exist within the deterministic world, and all of our physical evidence points to the deterministic world where we don't have free will.
Well, what I was saying is that our evidence doesn't point to that for us necessarily.
Why not?
It doesn't. Yeah, I mean, neuroscience isn't able to.
If people always acted in the most deterministic fashion, then there would be no such thing as surprise.
Wait, no. Surprise is defined as your consciousness not being aware of something in its environment. Deterministic steps back and says all of this is deterministic. It was planned that you would be surprised.
That's a fair point.
But right? You're saying
deterministic universe means the system is the entire universe, is everything around us.
Yeah, and you're saying that all of our evidence leads to a deterministic universe, but I think at least in terms of decision making in neuroscience so far, we're nowhere near understanding even whether C. elegans, which has 307 neurons, or something like that, and we know all of its
everything is mapped
subdomains.
out completely.
Everything has been mapped out. We still can't know if it's going to turn left or right in 10 minutes.
Right. So why?
And so I think we like to say that our evidence, a lot of things, I would agree with you, we could see as deterministic. Like a meteor, we could predict one is going to, we can predict a comet's going to swing by Earth in 2058 or something like that.
Right.
Mechanically, a lot of things are deterministic, but when it comes to decision making, I don't think we have enough evidence at all to say that in the field of decision making, things are deterministic.
What evidence do you have against it? What evidence do you have? So do you think there's something originating that's creating decisions? It seems like all the evidence points to it being deterministic. In the C. elegans, and we don't know if it's going to move left or right.
I mean, the system could just be too complex for us to understand, right?
Yeah.
It's the same as what we talked about earlier. Like, there's a lot of inputs that we're not seeing, that we're not measuring just by knowing everything about the C. elegans. So, yeah, it's possible we'll never be able to, I guess, move from seeing it. I guess, doesn't this go into a little bit the theory that there's a little bit of chaos in everything? That even if it's deterministic, there's an element of random chance or error, which doesn't make sense in a deterministic view of the world, I guess, because if everything's predetermined, then there's no need or really room for there to be a small element of complete randomness to suddenly appear in different places.
One example of that is like weather predictions. The reason we can't predict weather past 7 to 10 days is because of chaos, right? Everything gets too complicated, wind patterns change, and the models dissolve into nothing because it's too complex. There are too many variables. We can't predict that far out, even with 10 times the computational power we have now. That's one element of randomness, but it's not actually random. And it is deterministic, and if you had infinite computational power and infinite knowledge about every atom in the universe, you'd be able to solve that problem.
But then you would need more computational power than exists in the entire universe.
Right, but it's still deterministic.
That's an interesting question. If something needs more than what could possibly be ever achieved.
It's still deterministic. Imagine you're playing The Sims, and it's a very enhanced version of The Sims that's like a very basic universe for us. And the best computer they have can't predict that a ball is going to bounce. But the programming of the game still has the ball bouncing. The ball bounces regardless of if the computer within the game can bounce the ball.
But you're just making an argument that there are physical laws to which things must adhere.
Right.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that with an element of randomness that it always has to be so, I guess.
Where's the element of randomness coming from?
Well, that would be the chaos theory bit that I don't understand.
So that's one branch of chaos theory, and that's the example where everything is deterministic. It just seems chaotic to us. The other branch of chaos theory is quantum.
At the level of the electron.
And that actually is not deterministic. Right?
It's not deterministic. That's what bothered Einstein a lot, I think, where he had his famous quote that God does not play dice with the universe.
But he does.
That's what Niels Bohr told him.
It is deterministic or isn't then?
So quantum mechanics is not deterministic. Quantum mechanics is probability based.
I think I don't understand it, but is it the thing with the electron?
That's one example. Another example is a photon. Have you heard of polarized filters?
Yeah.
If you have a polarized filter that only lets light go through that is oriented like this, light that's oriented like this, perpendicular, is not going to pass, right? Light that's oriented like this is going to pass. What about light that's oriented at the 45-degree angle? Does it pass or not?
I'm going to say it passes, but it's scattered. It is like, it's going to have a different pattern.
Okay, that's true. It might have a different pattern. What do you think? Light going through a polarized filter that is 45 degrees to the polarized filter.
It loses intensity?
It passes 50% of the time. And when it passes 50% of the time, its polarization doesn't stay like this. It either changes like this or changes like this. And it's impossible to predict if it's going to turn, which way it's going to change, and if it'll pass. I mean, not impossible. I mean, it's like rolling a dice. It's impossible to predict what the dice will say, but if you do 1,000,000 trials, you can predict on average what it will be. So quantum mechanics follows similar laws to that. And that introduces an element of randomness, and I've always wondered if neuroscience is based on some quantum effect that leads to decision making. But I haven't read anything about that, and I haven't really.
Well, that's interesting.
Right. So the universe is not completely deterministic.
Yeah, I mean, you could still say though, and here I'm arguing for the side that I don't really believe in, but just because there is some randomness does not preclude the idea of things being predetermined. Like, okay, I don't know if this electron will be
There's a 1 in 2 chance it's going to be
above
one
the
way.
atom or below the atom. Yeah.
or the other way.
And I think just the fact that we don't know which direction it will be in 5 seconds does not mean that if we go through these 5 seconds and then rewind and then go again, I think it would still go to the same position, even though we did not know it 5 seconds ago.
Okay, so you're saying if we have some quantum case where it can go left and right, and we watch it go left, if we rewind back, does it mean that it will always go left?
At that specific situation.
In time. So you're saying even the things that seem random or probabilistic to us in quantum mechanics might be deterministic.
It could be deterministic. Yeah, I don't think that this theory in itself, like this idea in itself of randomness, I don't think that necessarily rejects the idea of predeterminism.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like if I flip a coin right now and I get heads, and then I go back in time and I flip it again the exact same way, the exact same moment, it'll always be heads.
It'll always be heads.
What if quantum is that way too?
Yeah.
And we just don't understand the dynamics of flipping the coin.
And that would be what Einstein was saying, that God does not play dice with the universe, that maybe we don't understand how it's going on, but
you don't need God for this either.
Oh, wait, I mean, yeah. I mean,
yeah, he wasn't really a theist either. I think. He was just saying.
He used God in the sense of universe, pretty much. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that.
But I don't agree with it.
Why not?
Because the implication, if everything is predetermined, is that there is no free will, right?
Right.
So it doesn't make any sense because we're already talking about breaking like one of the fundamental laws, which is going backwards in time to see the same coin flip. I would say that it would make more sense to think you are going to flip a coin, and 5 seconds from now you're going to flip a coin exactly the same way. And I think what the quantum theory, the second one that you were talking about, would say, yes, you might get heads the first time, but it's an even shot whether or not you're going to get heads or tails again the second time. And you can get heads 50 times in a row without it being a law that you're always going to get heads if you do it the same way.
Wait, that's why you need to go back in time, because you're doing everything the exact same way.
Right, but if you have to break the rules of the universe to prove your point that everything's deterministic, then that doesn't make sense for the world that we actually live in.
Why not?
Because we don't live in a world where you can go backwards and observe exactly the same phenomenon in exactly the same way.
Right, but it doesn't mean we can't think about it.
Sure, we can think about it, but you're introducing a hypothetical to prove a point that is basically that applies to reality, not to the hypothetical.
Yeah, that's fine.
I guess another way to think
but that's
of
the only
it
way
is,
that's the only way to redo the exact same scenario.
And I mean, there could be another way where, by some extremely minimal chance, everything in the universe ends up being exactly the same as it was at that particular moment.
On a long enough timeline.
Yeah, that's
statistically, yes.
And
I think statistically no, but that's fine.
I thought that was the whole thing. It's like if you wait long enough, well, I guess you're probably right.
Yeah, I mean, like every single atom will be in the exact same place relative to every single other atom. But if, suppose that it does happen to be the case,
and you flip the coin again,
but the coin flipping, that's more of a mechanical,
right.
Like how much force torque is going on into it. But but if you're thinking about the electron, and I mean I have no background in physics beyond like AP physics, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I think that if everything goes back to exactly how it was, or not goes back as in like in time, but if everything
becomes exactly as it was,
happens to be that it has become exactly as it was, and all the atoms are moving in the same direction that they were moving in. So it's not just that they're in the same place, but momentum and everything is preserved.
Right. Is it going to be the same outcome?
I would think it
For the
would be the
electron.
same outcome.
The other
but
way
I
to think about
But
it.
that would then it would not be consistent with the quantum theory, the quantum mechanics theory.
Well, no, because the quantum mechanics theory doesn't say.
It says it's a probability, and I'm giving
Right.
you that. That's why I said, you might flip it 50 times and everything could be exactly the same way, and you might get heads 50 times. But then maybe you're in for a run of 50 tails, like 3 hours from now, if that's when you're flipping.
Okay,
coins.
so you don't like the time travel. Imagine we have parallel universes and our universe splits into two at time 0. At time 1, you're flipping a coin in the exact same manner in both universes. Is it always going to be the same, heads and heads? Or is it always going to be tails and tails, or is it going to be different?
I think it could. I think now, because now you have 2 coins, but there's a 50% chance you're going to both get the same result. So both heads or both tails.
So you think there's actually some element of
But-
randomness to flipping a coin?
Yeah, I think that if the theory holds, then the probability changes if you suddenly have 2 coins. The probability of what you're going to get changes.
I think
But-
we
but-
agree
but
that
like-
flipping a coin is mechanical and that doesn't change.
But I think he's thinking of it more in the coin being the electron.
Okay, so if you have an electron, is it always going to be in the same orbital, or is its orbital position going to change if you have the parallel universes?
If you don't know, if you can't predict it, and the whole point is that it changes despite however you think it's going to be, it always does the opposite or some variation, then I would think that it would probably not always be identical in both universes.
Einstein disagreed.
Yeah, but then Bohr disagreed with Einstein.
What did he say?
Bohr told Einstein, "You can't tell God what to do."
Cute. That's a good answer.
But yeah, I think in the realms of electron and quantum physics,
None of us knows enough
we're
to-
probably just trying to base it on intuition, which
Just like in the year 200, they didn't know enough about classical mechanics to predict a coin flip.
I mean,
Whereas
we don't
now,
either.
we know that you can model a finger flipping a coin and say the force is going this way and the torque is going this way and the spin is going this way and the atmospheric pressure is going this way.
What's the minimal number of variables you think you'd need to predict it accurately?
It's going to be thousands, right? If it's a 2-dimensional space versus a 3-dimensional space, a 3-dimensional space will be a lot more. But I'm sure you can run a computer simulation that shows a finger flipping a coin and how moving a finger 1 millimeter to this side of the coin is going to change the flip.
have you read Chaos by James Gleick? Okay, a lot of what you were saying earlier about weather prediction sounds a lot from. Have you read it?
No.
Like what he writes in the book. Some guy from the 1960s tried to predict weather, and he put in 6 different variables only. And I don't understand the process of simulation, how he actually did it, but the values he input at the beginning, and it was things like initial temperature, initial wind speed, initial wind direction, and then a few other things. He put in a few values, and then he looked at the final temperature as predicted 3 days from when it starts. And the initial values he put in were up to 6 decimal places. But the output was only 3 decimal places, so the final value. And then he got his final values and he put them in and ran the whole thing backwards. And he saw that the initial values based on the final values were completely different from what he originally had. And the reason for that was because the output was only in 3 decimal places versus 6 decimal places. And these were extraordinary numbers, I think on the order of thousands, but a change on the order of magnitude of 1 millionth
Yeah.
of the original value made the initial values look nothing like what he actually input. And I think the point of this was to talk about the butterfly effect, how one minor difference could influence things in an unimaginable
Change the
way.
entire model, yeah.
And I guess what Alex you're saying is just because it does change it in an unpredictable and just totally unimaginable way, that doesn't preclude us from maybe being able to devise something that could
To predict it.
predict it someday. And Brian, I think what you were saying is that we have no reason to believe that, we don't necessarily have a reason to believe that we will someday find something that predicts everything.
Yeah, but even if you don't predict something, even if you can't predict it, never find the reason or the
Doesn't mean
source.
it's not deterministic.
Right.
I agree with you there. I think the original disagreement was that, Alex was saying that there's no evidence for a consciousness-based decision, and I'm saying that everything could very well be predetermined, but that doesn't preclude the possibility of a consciousness existing. Right?
Consciousness
Yeah.
or free will?
Well, I use those in that context interchangeably, like free will
Right.
through
But
consciousness.
just because it doesn't preclude the possibility of it existing doesn't mean it exists. Right?
No,
this,
I know,
This is
I
like
know.
you've heard the teapot.
yeah,
I wasn't
space
arguing
analogy?
for it. I was just saying the possibility exists if you wanted to believe that that you are conscious, for example, and making your own decisions.
And there could be a unicorn on the other side of that wall.
They're good.
But that, like, I guess when you're talking about which one is more likely, don't you kind of have to use your inference of what you know about the physical world? And I use that inference to say there's not a unicorn behind that wall. You know what I mean? There's not a teapot floating, orbiting the Earth.
I would agree that you should, for things that can be verified. Yeah. For things that
but
you
even
have
for
ways
things
to
that can't be
measure.
verified.
This might be going a bit off topic, but there's a book by Owen Barfield called Saving the Appearances, A Study in Idolatry. And in it, he argues that if three people sitting in one room, I mean, this isn't exactly what he's arguing, but the gist of what he's saying is if the three of us believe that there is a unicorn on the other side of the wall, then to us, there is a unicorn on the other side of the wall.
Right, but it doesn't mean that there is a unicorn on the other side of the wall.
But if the three of us believe it, then it's there.
Is it?
That's what.
So you're mixing things now. If the three of us operate under the belief that the unicorn exists on the other side of that wall, then it doesn't matter if the unicorn is physically there or not.
Right.
Because we're going to behave as though there is.
Yeah, that's okay. So there was an interesting
so
experiment back when we used to do experiments on monkeys. This is an interesting
We
experiment.
still do experiments on monkeys.
I don't remember. Oh, yeah, we still do, but this is
Maybe not
back,
in this institution, but
or maybe
in the
when
world.
it was like okay to do less ethical experiments on monkeys. There was this experiment where you had it was a monkey that doesn't live as long as us. I don't remember which one, but it would be in a box and it would have whatever. There would be a society there, like multiple monkeys, multiple families. There's a set of stairs, and the monkeys can walk up the stairs and there's a banana at the top of the stairs. There's also a bell that they hit, so there's and it makes a noise. And if they go up the stairs and hit the bell and get the banana, they get some kind of punishment. Let's say it's a shock. So originally, when they first put that,
so when they get the banana, they get a shock.
they get a shock, and then they don't get the. I mean, they keep the banana, but like you get punished for it.
Yeah.
So originally, when that was placed in, the monkeys would go up, they would get the shock, they would take the banana, and then they would be hurt. So they were increasingly less likely to go up and get the banana because they would be delivered a punishment. Mm-hmm. They showed that the likeliness of getting the banana decreased over time, first of all. Then, when the monkeys began to die out, the younger monkeys would not go up to get the banana because there was a thought that you would go up and get the shock. Eventually, all of the original monkeys that had ever been delivered a shock or had ever seen anybody be delivered a shock died out, and you have this entirely new generation of monkey that still didn't get the banana because because there was a shock, right? Because there was fear of this punishment.
Communication.
Right. So there's some kind of communication going on. And like we were saying, if there's a unicorn behind that wall, there's a unicorn behind the wall. So eventually they remove the punishment for getting the banana and they still wouldn't get it. Because there's this idea that there's a punishment associated with it.
It's the same with elephants in a circus. So if you take a young elephant when they're small and you put a stake in the ground and you tie them to the stake with rope, initially, when they're young, they might struggle against the stake and to try and escape.
Right.
But as they gradually learn that pulling on the rope basically just tightens the rope around
Causes
their
them
neck,
hard.
causes pain, they stop pulling away.
Yeah.
And so when they're much bigger, when they could very easily just waltz off, they don't even try.
Right.
Because they're so ingrained to not try and run from the stake that they don't even pull.
So it seems like this effect of unicorn past the wall can exist within a generation and over multiple generations. That's cool. And that's an example of things that exist but that have no physical basis. Right?
So are we back to the conscious?
Because that's a fear, that's like a sentiment, that's a culture that exists. But there's nothing material corresponding to that.
Yeah.
I guess you could say the most material substance is the circuits in the brain that elicit the fear or elicit the anxiety about doing that.
It's like in ancient, in primitive cultures and shamanistic cultures, they would usually, each society would have a totem, like a certain object or animal or plant, like tree or something, which they identify with in a participatory manner. Like there was some, I think, British explorer from the early 20th century who went to Australia and interacted a lot with the Aboriginal people there. And he took one day with him a camera and started taking pictures of them. And he took a picture of a young Aboriginal boy, and there was a kangaroo in the background. So he took the picture, and then he, I don't know how they prepared pictures at the time, but he prepared it, and then he showed it to the boy afterwards. And the boy started jumping, and he's like, "Wow, that's me. And so is the kangaroo." So like to them, they see the kangaroo as themselves as well. It's like, for us, we draw the line between self and non-self at the physical edge of our bodies. So like where my body ends, I end. But to these other people, the line they draw extends far beyond their like physical self. And the boy felt like the kangaroo was he himself.
Wait, did he actually not know that the kangaroo was not himself? Sorry, maybe I didn't. Maybe I missed something.
I think no. Yeah, it's hard for us to understand, but I think if I understood it correctly from what that guy was writing, it's that the boy knew that the kangaroo was also himself. I think that's the way that he put it.
But the kangaroo was not. Clearly, the kangaroo.
To us, he isn't. But to the boy, he and the kangaroo are one.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it was just like, because we were talking about how something can be
Can have a value without actually being part of us.
Yeah.
That's almost like I broke my phone recently, and I became depressed that my phone broke, and it made me realize that my phone is like an extension of myself.
Elon Musk makes that point. We are very low-dimensional
AI.
Basically, cyborgs, essentially. Where our phones, we're attached to them. They're basically an extension of us. The only problem, the difference between us and the cyborgs or like man-machine that you see on movies is that the interface for connecting with the phone is our fingers or our voice. And it's so much slower. The bandwidth is just too narrow to actually interact in a way that's seamless.
Yeah.
To make it as integral. But we are still already fairly well along that path of basically it's an extension of who we are.
Yeah. We use them for everything. We use them for communication. We use them for photography. We use them for entertainment. We use them for information.
It is an extension of your persona. You buy the case that you want because it says something about who you are, and you look after it different amounts because you care about it more or less.
It's always on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we store all like...
Your personal information is on there.
Yeah.
Bank account details, transfers.
Yeah.
Anything anyone would need.
It really is, yeah. So these people in the shaman culture extended their consciousness to nature. We do it to our...
Yeah, it is a really good analogy. Yeah.
And that's probably why it's freeing to not rely on technology, because I don't know. I felt like it was a burden to break my phone. I felt like it was like I lost a part of myself.
How long was it broken before you got like a replacement?
3 days. But those 3 days were so freeing at the end. It's like when I went to England to live there, I stayed on my T-Mobile plan in the States, which limited me to 2G data, which is enough for texting and Google Maps and phone calls. And I was okay with it because like it kind of forced me to not use my phone. And it was like maybe a monetary restriction. I didn't want to pay another $15 a month to get another plan, but it was also kind of nice.
Yeah.
So maybe there's something freeing about not having that extension of our consciousness.
Well, it forces you, I guess, to interact more directly with the world that is currently in front of you.
Right.
Right. I don't know about you guys. I've nearly walked into a bunch of light posts or
All the
like
time.
bollards and stuff just because I'm so busy checking my phone that I don't see exactly where I'm going.
Yeah. Headphones in, all that stuff.
Exactly. No, it's problematic. But on the subject of, I guess, extension, I think it's probably safe to say that when we empathize with other people, that is a temporary form of extension of our persona or our psyche to another person to experience with them whatever it is they're going through, whether it's celebration because something good happened or sadness or because something bad occurred. I think empathy is also an interesting, not physically based emotion where we share our pain and our joy with others in a way that's not really material.
Yeah.
Does
What
that make
about
sense?
reading a first-person account? Isn't that kind of the same thing?
I suppose, yeah. I guess you could empathize with the writer.
Yeah, okay. So it's still empathy is what you're saying, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, makes sense.
I guess the materialist would argue about the existence of mirror neurons.
What are those?
Have you heard of them?
I haven't, no. Mirror?
Mirror. It's when these studies were done in monkeys, and basically when a monkey sees a monkey in front of him lifting up his arm or something like that, then I think his own neurons that would fire when he lifts up his arm also fire, or something like
That's
something along that line. So they call them mirror neurons because they do whatever the person in front of you is doing.
I can kind of see the evolutionary reason for that, right? You do want some cohesion amongst individuals that live in a society, that live in a species, social species.
Yeah, it's
there's like a
you
benefit
can't understand. I guess you can't understand what is going on in the mind of whoever's sitting in front of you. But if you see like he's raising his hand and about to strike you, and you think, oh, I would do that when like I want to strike someone, then yeah, there is an evolutionary advantage to it.
Well, I think moreover, it's interesting because if the mirror neuron is true, for example, then going back to our example of the banana with the shock, it's not necessarily a communication thing, right? If you see a bunch of monkeys that are
Not
going
do
up
it.
and getting shocked and coming back, if they experience pain, if they yelp, for example, in pain, for whatever reason, then you might tangentially experience a much more muted version of that if the mirror neuron functions the way I'm understanding it currently does. So at least for that first generation, you don't all have to go do it to recognize this is not a safe thing to do.
Right.
For future generations, I suspect the communication of that would be important.
Right. Or just the fact that nobody does it.
Or the fact that nobody does
Yeah.
it.
So it makes
So
you
you
afraid of
mirror
the
the-
unknown. Yeah.
Yeah, it turns into an examination of culture
Yeah.
or tradition. Or,
Yeah, I think that's what the study called it. I think they called it some like traditions last in animals too. But it's
I
still
wonder how long it
communication,
takes.
it's just nonverbal.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you know how long it took to decay?
I don't remember now.
That would be interesting to see how many generations it takes.
I'm sure it decayed then, right? It had to.
Oh, it had to. Yeah, and then to see if you could map like some sort of ideological, like if it takes 4 or 5 generations for it to die out,
Right. For
then it
shock
took
banana.
like 5 generations for the Soviet Union to leave communism.
Right. And how long until Christianity dies out or whatever? How long until-
And Christianity has been around for so many generations that
Right.
you know it's a true religion.
But it's self-propagated, right? As in, the good and the bad, I suppose, in many ways, is self-propagated through the populations. It's not like, there's no generation of Christians that didn't attend and was essentially like a first generation of going to church, right?
Oh yeah.
It's different. You'd have to have like 5 generations of people not go to church and then suddenly find that Christianity sprouts back up again. So, for it
Yeah,
to follow
but
the
is there
same.
anything about Christianity that's like originating and growing?
What do you mean?
Like Christian or religion as a whole is on the decline worldwide,
Yeah.
right?
Is it?
I thought so.
Or just in the first world?
Maybe in the first world, maybe in the West, maybe in the U.S. and Europe.
For sure in the U.S. and Europe. Let's just stick to that. Let the specifics of this
Is
go
there
by.
anything
What's
about
the point?
is there any element of Christianity that's like being rejuvenated? Like, is there any positive feedback that's going back and reinvigorating Christianity,
I think
or any? Yeah. Because like, if you're assuming something is declining, like fear of shock banana, that's one thing. But is there something that reinvigorates that fear in generations that have never seen the shock?
Well, in the monkeys, it would be if someone is
Tried
curious enough and tries again, and then
they get
they're
hurt.
like, "Oh, the stories they told us were all true."
Yeah.
If you go and you grab the banana, yes, you get the banana, but you also get shocked.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know for Christianity if there's any sort of positive feedback loop
Yeah.
currently. You know,
yeah, I mean,
Do you know of anything?
or generally.
it's the experience of one's personal relationship with God that keeps driving Christianity forward. And then there are things like miracles and
Yeah, but then why is it declining? Because that's what's perpetuating it. But is it just like an exponential decrease, or does it get like a resurgence? I would imagine religion probably resurges in times of trouble, right? Maybe after the 2008 Wall Street failure, the world markets crashed. Maybe people turn to religion, right?
yeah,
Like people turn to
apparently the weekend after 9/11, churches were
super full.
like super full. There were no parking spaces or anything.
It's like Nazi Germany rose to power when the post World War I, the economy was doing terrible, stuff like that, right? It's like people turn to religion and community in times of need.
Yeah, I wouldn't equate Nazi Germany with.
Well, no, but it's not. I mean, the point is like, yeah, okay, maybe don't equate
but I
those.
see your point.
Post 9/11, George W. Bush's approval rating went up to like 90%.
People turn to whatever tribes they affiliate with themselves.
Yeah,
Whenever things look not
in times
great.
of fear. Yeah,
And I mean not great. I don't mean bad. I mean just not great.
but so maybe
Yeah.
so
It
maybe
takes
that's
very little for people to dig down into their trenches.
Yeah.
Because it's a very human instinct.
so maybe that's a correlation between the fact that our lives are better now than it was 50 years ago, and the fact that America is generally less religious now than it was 50 years ago.
I think there's probably a solid correlation there if you're...
I fully agree.
Like maybe people need religion or think they need religion less.
I don't
I
think
agree.
people think that because I don't think that's an active thought, but I think it's a laziness that sprouts from comfort.
Yeah.
If you're comfortable and you're like, everything's good and I don't need to struggle for, general stuff day to day, and what's this whole thing, people talking about hell and good and bad, and I don't need any of that. Like, everything's fine. Like, what could that possibly do for me? I'm, good as I am, and
Yeah.
whatever. I don't think there's anything negative or wrong happening in these people's minds. I just think people get comfortable and get lazy about going to church or participating in any of their Christian groups. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying I think it's just something that happens over time. It's the same way that, people might participate in other aspects of society less when they're comfortable.
Right, yeah.
And I don't think religion is an exception.
Like voting, for instance. You might vote less if you're happier.
yeah, or if you're indifferent.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
indifference is often
Sign of
caused
happiness.
by comfort.
Yeah, content, yeah.
I was thinking. I think a couple of years ago I was thinking about this. How in my head it all tied back to fewer people dying. Because like if you think in the third world, every 2, 3, 4 weeks, someone dies. You go to their funeral. You're reminded that life is finite, and then you ask yourself: Is there anything after this life, or do I just exist, live, and die, and then it ends? Whereas in the first world, we don't have that constant reminder of death. That I think most people in the third world don't live as though they're going to live forever. They don't have that ingrained in their minds. But for us in the first world, we barely ever think about death. We
We
exist.
have no idea how to talk about it either.
Yeah, yeah. We exist as though it doesn't, as though it's not something that will ever affect us, as though it's something that is more of a theoretical concept than anything that would actually happen to us. And I think that is the main reason why, as you were saying, with progress in like with all this progress we've done in our health and increasing our comforts and everything, we don't. I think it ends up coming back to we just don't die as much. We don't experience death as much, and therefore we neglect anything that has to do with what would happen to us after death.
Yeah, makes sense. A lot of people turn to religion because it answers questions that you otherwise wouldn't get answers to. And those questions are purpose, and those questions are life after death. And if you see those questions more, you're going to wonder about those questions more, you're going to turn to religion for answers. We need to do an experiment where 2 people get iPhones. One of them has a notification every half hour that says, "Remember, you will die."
Yeah.
And the other one does not. And then see if they become religious or not.
Remember, you are immortal. A lot of, I think, like in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, a lot of people would just put skulls on their desks as a memento mori, a reminder of their mortality.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's why they did it. I'd seen it depicted in books and also in like, movies, but it's wow.
And there's when I was at the Holy Mountain in Greece, it's a place called Mount Athos, which has had monasteries for the past 1600 years in the Orthodox Church. There was a room which was full of previous monks' skulls. So like shelves of skulls. And then on one of them it said, this was written in Greek, so like someone told me. One of them it said, it's just a skull, and written on it is, what you are, I once was. What I am, one day you will be.
That's like the Neil deGrasse Tyson quote. We all come from stardust, and eventually we will all become stardust.
Yeah.
Right? We all come from the earth, we eventually become the earth.
Yeah.
Where just the
pretty
same
much.
atoms recycled again and again, the same biomolecules are recycled.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's kind of depressing, but it's also kind of unifying.
Is it? Well, the question
depressing.
is, the question
it's a reminder of
should it
death.
be depressing?
I suppose what's interesting here is if everything's deterministic, and also if like you know death is coming, and you know that it's come for all 11, 12 billion humans that have come before you.
Yeah.
Like why does it make you sad? Would be a good question. Or
Because it's still terminal.
Or why should you feel special about any of it?
I don't think you should feel special, but I think it's reasonable for it to be sad.
Why is it reasonable? How do you know that what comes after that isn't better than what?
Because there's no evidence for it being better.
There's no evidence for it being worse.
There is. And a dead brain, as far as we know, has less consciousness than a living brain.
But now we're back to that sticky question of consciousness.
And
Of like, does it really matter?
What do you mean doesn't matter?
Well, I would argue that a dead brain has no consciousness.
Do you remember what it was like before you were born?
No.
That's what it's going to be like after you die.
Quite probably. I'll even concede that. I don't remember it. How can that be depressing?
Well, no. It's so being dead doesn't suck, but the fact that your life is finite is unfortunate. Because there's going to be so much going on in the world that we're going to miss.
But that's if you think about it in terms of yourself. If that's the egotistical view.
That's what consciousness is. It's myself. Right?
I suppose. But, I mean, I guess we didn't really define properly what consciousness was.
Yeah.
There's an element of you that says you are yourself.
Yeah.
That is different and that you think, that you value more than you value, I'm going to say 99.9% of all other humans.
Or at least there's some individualism to your consciousness.
But that gets back to that sort of, like, but why should that matter to any of the rest of anyone? Or why is that special? Why is that individualness?
It's not. I didn't say it was special. It just exists. Right? I am me. I am Alex. I'm not Mark. And my consciousness tells me that. It doesn't mean I'm special, but it does mean that I'm distinct from Mark. You know?
Yeah, you're distinct from Mark. That's true. But the bit of you that says that I am Alex, that is predetermined then also.
Yeah.
Okay. But so the sadness thing is also predetermined. The fact that I don't think it's sad is predetermined.
Everything is predetermined. I mean, in my view of the universe, at least. You were saying something.
Sorry,
You were saying something.
was I?
Go ahead.
How
Sorry,
long ago?
I don't remember.
Or was it what I was just about to say?
Go
Right?
ahead. Just now.
Yeah, I can't remember what yeah, I was gonna say, speaking of predeterminism, if everything is predetermined, then there is no good and evil.
Correct.
Or happy or sad, really. It's all
Um,
subjective, right? It doesn't matter.
I think there can still be happy and sad. Because
Happy is whatever makes you feel
happy.
happy.
Happy is whatever hormones and brain waves and brain circuits that are associated with happiness. Just like there's still red if everything is deterministic.
Okay,
Just
okay.
like there's still pain.
No, that's a good thing. So you're talking about how consciousness is individual, right?
Yeah.
And so, to you, really, unless you care about someone, then you don't really care about his or her happiness. So Mao Zedong seizing power. What did he say? I seize power, or power comes from the barrel of a gun. Killing everyone, becoming the most powerful person, the happiest person in China, and having all those close to him also be happy. You're saying that that act is not inherently better or worse than, like, I don't know, like Mother Teresa.
Not having done that. Just not having done that.
In my utilitarian society, we can weigh our concern for others like a bell curve. The people closest to the center, the closest to the mean, our immediate family members and friends should get the most attention. The people farthest from us can get no attention. But what Mao Zedong is high attention for the people in the middle and then negative attention, harm to the people that were very far from him.
But it made him happy. So he didn't care about what happens to the others. Because you're saying since there's no good and evil, then like a fiduciary marker of good and evil becomes my own happiness, right?
I mean, it could be. I don't think it should be.
Why
If you want a
shouldn't it be?
fiduciary measure of good and evil, it's like how much suffering do you cause? How much do you reduce suffering?
But why should I care about anyone else's suffering?
Because my consciousness is individual to me, and not to, Tyrone in the suburbs of Chicago.
Are we talking about my view of the moral landscape, or are we talking about the individuals? I feel I'm getting confused. Are we still
I
operating
feel
in
like
this
we've
deterministic
linked
world?
the two together, or we're trying to link the two together in the sense that your caring about other individuals is tied to the fact that what you might do is directly influenced by the individuals you care about and not anyone else.
Right.
And that is contradictory to any idea of like good and evil, because it doesn't make sense to have good or bad
Right.
if you only care and the only measure of what makes you happy, for example, is what keeps you and the people close to you happy.
But that's not true, because if I know that me and my close family and friends are happy, but everybody else in the world is suffering, I wouldn't be happy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it's true to think that everybody that I don't know can die and I will be happy.
I'm saying that's fine for you, but for people who are not like that, for people who are like, the world be damned, like,
Yeah.
I'm happy and the people close to me are happy. Is that okay?
Yeah, we call those people libertarians. No. That's an interesting perspective on the political spectrum. Republicans, conservatives tend to care more about the people that are close to them, less concerned about the people away from them. Liberals, Democrats, socialists, they tend to care more about the people that are farther away. And their reach is broader, but the amount of care that you can give to a broader group is obviously less, right? If you have 100 resources and you're giving them to your immediate family, each of your family gets a lot of resources. If you give it to the entire world, then the entire world gets a lot less resources. So it's like, you can think of it as a series of bell curves, and the steeper the bell curve, the more you are small government, small.
Yeah, there are, this brings up things like whether the people on the left actually care about, the happiness of all these people, or whether just caring about the happiness of all these people is good because there are so many of these people, and so they would get so much more votes.
Oh, true.
So,
Yeah.
but
That's like how genuine are the actual politicians?
Okay,
Yeah.
but let's say, does it matter if they're genuine or not? If you do help 100,000 people versus helping 100, is it not net gain if you're being utilitarian?
It depends on how you assign the values in the utilitarian society. Do you value the American people more than you value people from Syria? If so,
How many
you
are
might.
there?
That's the thing. These are all the questions. And
I mean, if you're going to be utilitarian about it, I don't think I would fall in the utilitarian camp.
I think I would, but then like the subjectivity still arises in the values that you assign to everything. You know, like so you can say I'm utilitarian and I'm going to optimize happiness. That's the easiest measure. But then how do you measure
How
happiness?
is that
do
the
you
easiest measure?
what would you optimize? Suffering and happiness.
I meant, how can you measure happiness?
Oh, sorry. It's I guess I agree. That's the point. The point is that
okay.
happiness is subjective. Suffering is subjective.
I guess degrees of suffering are subjective. Like, we can all say having a gunshot wound is not subjectively negative. Like, that's objectively negative.
Right, but are
Or
people in the
disease.
lowest income bracket in the U.S. suffering?
Yeah,
So I guess you have to
Edgy
distinguish
question.
between psychological anguish and physical pain.
Yeah, that's okay. So that's one pillar that you. Those are two different pillars. Bernie
and then if
Sanders
you
would say
compare
those
them
people are suffering.
and then if you compare them to someone in like sub-Saharan Africa,
Right.
then
No, they have.
they seem to
like,
be
They're still the
living the
top
life.
5%. Yeah.
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 So that's why it's like everything is subjective and relative.
Yeah. This is.
We're going all over the place. This is what.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to talk about how this brings up whether a country should focus on its own people or just like you were saying about should we care about only Americans or should we care about Syrians as well and people in whichever war-torn country. But the thing that started all of this is the question of if there is no good and evil, then and the only reason I brought up like people close to us is because like if my mom is happy, then I'm happy. So it's not necessarily me thinking about wanting my mom to be happy, but just for me to be happy by making her happy.
Right.
And so I guess for our purposes, you can even ignore making all the people close to you happy. Just making yourself happy is that the ultimate marker of good? Because like for you, that could be something. For someone else, that could be something else. Like, you know, maybe if you give someone CPR and that revives him and no one else was around to do that, you feel good and that makes you happy.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore you're saying that's good for you.
Right.
But then let's say someone else is in the same situation and it's the kind of person who like would kill animals when he was young. He would like I don't know, dissect cats or whatever.
Yeah. Put frogs in the microwave. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
You never did that, bro?
I missed that class.
You're saying you wouldn't save him, or you're saying?
and if that person enjoys seeing that guy suffering, and he's just happy seeing him suffering, you're saying that there is no absolute difference in goodness between your giving the guy CPR and the other guy just watching him suffer.
I think I didn't say that I didn't say that you should optimize only your own happiness. Where did you get that idea?
From the idea that there is no good and evil, and that I should just do whatever makes me happy.
Maybe good and evil is predetermined. Maybe moral and amoral is predetermined.
So that there is an actual moral and immoral? Absolutely.
It depends, because like you can say the situation is moral or amoral, right? Like Kim Jong-un's reign over North Korea is amoral. But if he does not actually make any decisions,
that's questionable, though.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, let's assume the U.S. perspective that his reign is amoral.
Yeah.
If you look at it from a deterministic perspective, he didn't actually make any of the decisions that led him to where he is now. He was born into this royalty. He was given this throne. He was told to eliminate his uncle or whoever else he killed so that he would have power. And he was told to keep the concentration camps going because it's the only way the country will be stabilized. He is not an evil person. The situation is evil. So I think if we're going to talk about everything in the deterministic sense, like we kind of have been earlier, you shouldn't assign good and evil to the people, but rather to their situation, to their actions. Because he's not the one actually making the decision to continue the concentration camps
Because it's predetermined.
in this deterministic universe.
Yeah, yeah. In a predeterministic worldview, there is no ownership of
Responsibility.
there's no responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the person who shot the gas station clerk didn't actually decide to shoot the gas station clerk. He was born into poverty, and his dad left him, and his mom treated him poorly and got into drugs, and he was on his own, and he didn't have any Doritos, so he went to the gas station to steal Doritos, and he had a fake gun, but then the fake gun didn't work, so he panicked and he got scared, and he ended up beating the gas station clerk to death.
And then the neurons just ended up firing in a way that made him.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's all of these environmental things, it's all of these developmental things, it's all of these societal influences that shape our decisions.
I guess then, if there is no individual sense of responsibility of right and wrong, of good and evil, then what do we base the societal good and evil
You don't
on?
change your action in society. You don't change the rules. Because
Like,
you
why
still
is-
want people like that guy to not do that again.
But if
You still want-
but if it's not
Well, you
good or
don't
evil on
want
the individual
anything.
level, that's what I was like
Right.
pointing
It's
at.
predetermined that you might be shocked or whatever, but to argue that there is some mythological you in a predetermined universe that doesn't want something or does want something or likes something or doesn't like something is kind of nonsensical.
Why?
Because it was predetermined. The you that you're ascribing agency to doesn't exist.
Yeah, it does.
No. There's the collection of atoms that is what we are calling you, but there's no agency. I don't know.
There's no agency, but you can still have desires without agency. You can still have preferences. You can still have emotions without agency. Just because you're removing the free will doesn't mean that you're removing the emotions, the consciousness.
So you're like a prisoner.
Yeah, if you're going to be pessimistic about it, you can think of it as a prisoner. You're a decision prisoner. But it certainly doesn't feel like it, right? Like we've never felt this.
Well, that's what I don't know if I am or not.
Yeah.
But
the
I
deterministic universe has decided that you will have this thought and have these.
Do you think desires are not choices either?
They're definitely not choices.
We can't choose what to desire.
Well, I mean, think about basic desires: food, shelter, water, belonging. Those are, you don't choose to desire those. That's the lowest level of Maslow's hierarchy.
Can't you choose not to desire them though?
Can you choose not to desire food? Aren't there biological mechanisms that make you? I don't know.
Is there a difference between desire and need?
Maybe we should differentiate, or maybe we should just say high-level needs or high-level desires, like
Yeah, I guess.
a Nintendo Switch. I bought a Nintendo Switch recently. It's amazing. But you could say I
PlayStation
desire
not good
it.
enough for you?
I could choose not to desire it, or alcohol. I could choose not to
You
want a
could-
beer.
But you can't
Yeah.
choose not to. It's predetermined that you would not want
Right,
it, or
exactly.
you would want it, or
Right, just like
however
it-
you want to
yeah.
phrase this.
Just like it's predetermined that the alcoholic will join a frat, become an alcoholic. His family had predisposition to alcoholism.
No, yeah, I could see that desires you cannot. I could see how you might not be able to choose your desires, but
But maybe it's a more interesting case if you choose a desire for something that is wrong, something like heroin, or
But
like
it's not
or
wrong.
like lust.
But it's not wrong.
Oh, that's a different question. But something that is not like a basic necessity. Like I desire Instagram likes. Can you choose not to desire Instagram likes? Can you choose not to want that?
No, you get a dopamine hit every time someone hits like.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I guess I was thinking about like the hunger strike person in the prison after 30 days of not eating. Yeah, I guess he still would desire food, but he chooses not to eat.
And that's what's impressive about his strike.
Yeah.
But he didn't choose not to eat.
I feel like we're bouncing between the deterministic universe and the not-deterministic universe.
I thought we were just operating under the assumption that it's deterministic because we didn't make up our minds. So,
Okay. So yeah,
but
he
it
didn't
seemed
choose
like
to-
it seemed like the base level world that we would inhabit would be deterministic. There's no reason to assume that there's anything added to it, right?
Okay, agreed. That's what I said.
Right.
Good.
Yeah.
So I'm saying
and
for the
that's-
purpose of the discussion, we
Okay.
should stick to that model
Yeah.
of the
Okay.
universe.
So
Yes.
he didn't choose to eat, and he also didn't choose to strike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's really not impressive at all.
Nothing
No,
is
because
impressive.
things can still be impressive.
They can be
His
rare.
body is
They can
suffering.
be rare. But I don't know that it would
Okay,
be...
so saying something is subjective is subjective as well. Like,
Right.
sorry, saying something is
Yeah.
impressive is subjective as well.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay. Like,
yeah. I think predeterminism takes out meaning. You can't. I don't think you can find meaning in something that.
if there are no decisions being made, you think things are meaningless?
Pretty much,
Yeah,
yeah. You're
I
not
think
here
so.
to... Like, that's why it doesn't matter if you live or die, if you remember what it was like before you were born. You're just here playing out the simulation.
But you could look at that optimistically and say,
I get to experience the simulation.
right.
Right.
Or I've never noticed that I don't have any free will. Therefore, whatever's going on is great.
Well,
I mean,
if-
I've
if
spent my
I'm-
time thinking about this particular dilemma, so I wouldn't say it affects my general
Yeah.
view of the world.
Like, it's weird because I still, like, I think I actually believe this and I still feel happy.
I don't think that's weird.
I think it's really weird.
I don't think it removes the meaning, is what I'm saying.
I
Because I
don't
still
think you-
feel like I have free will. And that could also be predetermined.
I think you.
Yeah, so the lowest level, so what we can, like, the lowest level of certainty we can have, or the highest level of certainty that we can have, is we live in a world bounded by physical laws where it seems like there's an equal probability that there is free will, or maybe it seems improbable that there is free will, but
Right.
we feel like we have free will.
Which is good enough to make us happy and give me meaning, at least.
I think if you feel something and operate as though it is the case, then that's what you believe. And you might think that.
But he would operate the same way regardless of whether or not he felt it.
That's
So
because it's
this is back to the unicorn thing. It's like, we could believe that there's one back there and act as if there is. It doesn't change the fact that physically, right now, back there's no unicorn.
like at the lowest level, we might not have any free will, but because I feel it at the upper levels, it might be good enough.
What are the lower and upper levels?
Have you heard of like programming languages? There are different levels of programming languages.
No.
This is how AI is going to be developed, and AI won't know how it works. You
There's
have
no way.
code. You have code that operates directly with the hardware that flips transistors on and off. This is the lowest level of code. Then you have a level of programming above that controls how you change those transistors. This is like assembly, the programming language. This is a second order programming language. And it can maybe do very basic computations with the transistors, and gates, or gates, exclusive or. And with those, you could do like basic multiplication, subtraction, additions, whatever. Then you have a level above that, third order, and that's what most people interact with. Some people can write in assembly, some people can write in machine code. Those are the first two levels. Third level is like, I think the best example of it is like C or C++. I think that's third level. Then there's MATLAB, which is like fourth and higher level. And there's Python, that's also a higher level one. You've abstracted away everything that's at the lowest level of what's actually interacting with the hardware. When you type into MATLAB, you're not actually looking at transistors, you're giving it commands that refer to a function, that refers 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 to a function. There are different levels of code. There are different levels of consciousness. We live in the outer level of consciousness where I feel fear. Why do I feel fear? Because very ingrained in my consciousness, there is a memory of my father leaving me when I was younger, and I have abandonment issues, and then my boyfriend left me and he made me feel abandoned, and then that was reinforced by my fear of people leaving me, and then I'm not good at, like all these things build up, and all we feel is fear. All we feel is abandoned, but we don't know why, and there's a bunch of layers as to why we know why. So it's impossible to experience something on the outside and not really know the root reason of why we experience it. It's impossible for us to not have free will down here, but imagine that we have free will further up. I don't know if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes sense. You don't
Yeah.
understand the mechanics of what you're experiencing.
Yeah.
But you know what you feel like you're experiencing. And I completely agree. If the world is deterministic, that's exactly how it would work. Because I've not heard of a person who argues for the deterministic model who doesn't say that it does feel like you do have free will.
Yeah,
But it doesn't make it so.
Yeah, agreed.
Right.
It's just like our brains work the same way. Like you feel an emotion. You don't feel neurons 500 billion to whatever, 5 billion to 6 billion firing in circuit. It's 5,000 to 6,000, right?
Sometimes you don't even know why you're feeling a certain emotion.
Right.
That's right. It's an input that you haven't clocked has occurred, and it's an underlying process that you don't understand.
Plus the accumulation of everything that happened in your day and the weather and it's cold out and it's windy and I forgot a jacket and my mom didn't call me. Like all these things, you know,
Yeah, no,
like contribute to our emotions and experiences.
that brings to mind the patient HM.
Yeah.
The guy whose hippocampus was bilaterally, I think, ablated, so he couldn't make any new memories. He has anterograde amnesia. So you talk to him, and then 2 minutes later, he forgets who you are, what you said to him, and just why you're in the room.
Oh, okay. I think I know about this guy. Yeah.
And interestingly, whenever he had an unpleasant conversation, like a few minutes later, he would feel in an unpleasant mood, but he would have no idea why.
Because he had amnesia.
He had amnesia, but he doesn't remember what happened, but he just knows that like he feels in a bad mood because he was in an unpleasant conversation.
Yeah.
But he has no idea why he's in a bad mood. But he's still in a bad
That's
mood.
fascinating. So it obviously starts something that carries on away from wherever it originated.
But that happens to us without anterograde amnesia. CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the mainstays in psychiatric treatments. Sorry, psychological treatments. Is trying to tease out those pathways. Why am I anxious? What is the root of my anxiety? What can I do to influence the root of my anxiety and change my day so that I don't run into this anxious stimulus? Yeah. It's like kind of working out where your emotions come from, why they exist, what you can do to change them, how you can modify them, what makes them better, what makes them worse. And being aware of all of this helps the emotions itself.
Yeah.
And it ends up working significantly better, I think, when you take SSRIs and CBT, the results are significantly better than SSRIs on their own. And I think CBT on its own, there's no significant difference between CBT on its own and SSRIs on their own.
On their own, but together?
And together they're synergistically better, yeah.
I'm guessing that CBT is the actual hard work and SSRIs just enhance the plasticity of the brain.
Yeah.
Something along those lines, because CBT is like the long process. CBT is like thinking through your experiences and emotions with a therapist. That's the actual work. That's hours of work as opposed to popping a pill. Popping a pill probably just loosens things up a bit, makes things more malleable. That's my guess, but who knows?
Yeah. I think the guy who pioneered it got not a Nobel, probably a Lasker Prize.
I don't know.
For CBT.
When was it? 50s, 60s?
He worked on it in the 60s or 70s, and then
later.
I think got the prize in 90s.
Okay.
But
it's such a broad. It's applied to everything. It's such a broad treatment. It's essentially therapy. Like when somebody says they're going to therapy, it's like always CBT.
It works.
Yeah.
So
I mean, subconsciously it works also when you take a placebo, for example, because you feel off and like you take a pill or something, and if you're given the placebo effect is well documented to help patients. And that's not you actively thinking that the drug is making you better, but the action of taking the drug somehow subconsciously changes your predisposition to how you feel, and you feel better.
I think it's because the mind has a huge influence on so many diseases and so many conditions.
Yeah.
And thinking that you're getting better is oftentimes enough to get better.
Yeah.
That's why a positive mindset is important.
It's huge, right?
But I can't choose one, so.
True.
Well, it's a sad point to end on, but yeah, because
we're out of time, I think.
We're out of time. But yeah, I thought I enjoyed this.
It was good.
It was fun.
Should we cut it?
Discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, bye.